today we're going to be learning about the Tudors. We won't be doing Henry VIII's sister or brother. Let's go!
He was born on June 28th in 1491, and he was crowned at Westminster Abbey on June 24th, 1509. He was also the Duke of York, Duke of Cornwall, Prince of Wales, Earl of Chester, and also King of England and Ireland. That's what he's made for. By the last years of Henry VIII's reign, the lithe and handsome youth had become bloated ruins, scarcely able to even walk. He had to be pushed around Hampton Court, especially in a built cart. Not even Holbein could hide in the reality of a gross and selfish tyrant. The 17-year-old Henry VIII came to the throne as the ruler of an increasingly wealthy Catholic country. He died as the ruler of a near-bankrupt Protestant country, whose whatever decisive split from Rome sparked a religious conflict that persisted for decades, whatever its superficial glamour. In the short term, at least, his reign spawned only division and economic isolation. Glamorous and accomplished bursting with the youthful vigour, the new King Henry seemed destined to consolidate his father, Henry VII's, achievements. England was poised to become a power of European repute under a ruler whose dazzling potency would even put the Holy Roman Emperor in the shades. As the Venetian ambassador reported in 1515, His Majesty is the most handsomest portent I have ever set my eyes upon. He is in every respect a most accomplished prince. Yet the fundamental shallowness of Henry's character, which is still invisible appetite for acclaim, sat side by side with a vindictive vulgariness, was clear from the start. Within a year of his accession, he had executed his father's two principal tax collectors in an attempt to curry popularity. Of more lasting significance, in the same year, he also married Catherine of Aragon, who had previously been married to Henry's elder brother, Arthur, who we mentioned in the video earlier, in 1502. Two themes dominated Henry's reign, both intended to reinforce what the king increasingly came to see as imperial status. The first was foreign conquest. The second was church reform. If latter was essential, a reaction to the events, the former was a conscious active policy from the start. The field of the cloth of gold. Henry VIII's earliest attempt to reconquer France may have ended in failure, but in 1520 they gave rise to one of the most remarkable spectacles of the period, the field of cloth of gold. Ostensibly called to confirm peace between England and France, the meeting outside Calais between the 29-year-old Henry and the new King of France, Francis I, was an opportunity to demonstrate to each other, as to the world, their imposing power. Effectively, the whole England nobility, in excess of 5,000 earls, churchmen and knights were transported to France, and Francis brought even more men. A small city of gaudily decorated tents was erected as a sign of their fellowship. Henry and Francis hunted, feasted, and wrestled together. Promises of England and France alike, as the world powers in the making, had never appeared more convincing. The emptiness at the heart of the spectacle was exposed less than 2 years later, when war between England and France resumed. Henry VIII casted himself as a reborn Henry V. In 1513, Henry mounted a costly invasion of France, the net result of which was capture of the two towns, Tournai and Therouanne, and the so-called Battle of the Spurs, in reality more than a little skirmish. In similarity, inclusive campaigns were launched against France in 1522 and 1523, and again in 1542. But Henry's fantasies of continental conquest came to nothing. He came much closer to the road to conquering Scotland, even if in the end he could not more make himself master of Scotland than could Edward I. In 1513, attempting to exploit Henry's absence in France, James IV of Scotland invaded England. His army was promptly unhailed as the Anglo-Scottish border at Flodden by an English force under Thomas Howard, the Earl of Surrey. Among the victims, his corpse, hauled from under a pile of dead Scots, was James himself. Henry encouraged how much he spent of his reign attempting to unite the English and Scottish crowns together. His efforts climaxed in the 1540s when a further crushing defeat of the Scots at Slowey Moss. In 1542, Henry began what he called rough wooing, a series of invasions of Scotland from 1544 and 1545, in which Henry attempted to force the Scots to accept his youngest son Edward as the husband-to-be of Mary. Henry's wives. Henry had 6 wives. I'll say them in order. Catherine of Arragon, born 1485-1536. Married Arthur, Prince of Wales in 1501. Then married Henry VIII, June 1509. Marriage then annulled in 1533. Surviving children, Mary, 1516. Anne Boleyn, 1501-1536. Married Henry VIII on January 1533. Executed May 1536. Surviving children, 1. Elizabeth, born 1536. Jane Seymour, 1509-1537. Married Henry VIII, May 1536. Surviving children, 1. 1537. Edward, born 1537. Anne of Cleves, 1519-1557. Henry VIII, January 1540. Marriage annulled in June 1540. Surviving children, none. Catherine Howard, 1520-1542. Married Henry VIII on July 1540. Executed February 1542. Surviving children, none. Catherine Parr, 1512-1548. Married Sir Edward Brewer, 1529. John, Lord of Lattmere, 1513. Henry VIII, July 1543. And Thomas Seymour, 1547. Surviving children, none. Henry VIII and the imperial expansion of England. Henry VIII, continental, ambitious, constantly outstripped his means to put them in practice. Early invasions of France achieved almost other than prodigious expenditure. The king's naval campaign were no more successful. His attempts to subdue Scotland met with a similar lack of success. Only in Wales, incorporated with England in 1546, Henry had claimed to have an ambitious achievement. The infant Queen of Scotland, Mary, the infant Queen of Scotland, that the Scots, with the active support of France, were able to resist, despite an English army of occupation stationed in Scotland for several years. Effectively, ended Henry's dynastic ambitions to unite the Scots and English crowns under a future Tudor monarch, at least on paper. Henry was more successful in making himself master of Ireland, where a half-hearted invasion led Henry to style himself as King of Ireland in 1541. In reality, English rule was restricted to the Pale. The area was immediately around Dublin. Only in Wales, which was united with England in 1536, was Henry's unequivocally successful. Other than absorption of Wales in 1536, by far the most striking act of Henry VIII in England was his break from Rome and subsequent takeover of the country's monastic communities. It would lead directly widespread and anti-Reformation movements, notably starting the Pilgrimage of Grace in the still strongly Catholic North. But by 1527, Henry had convinced himself that Catherine's failure to produce a son was a punishment from God for having married his brother's wife. Though she had 6 surviving children, only one, a girl, Mary survived. In fact, Henry, now in his late 30s, was not merely neurotactically anxious about to secure an heir, but has fallen obsessively head over heels with the much younger Anne Boleyn. He instructed his Lord Chancellor, the otherwise supreme able Cardinal Thomas Wolsey, to persuade the Pope approve for a divorce. Even for Wolsey, the royal command was too far. Infuriated by his Chancellor's failure to give him what he wanted, Henry stripped Wolsey of his office and condemned him to death. By 1534, prompted by a new and equal capable Chancellor Thomas Cromwell and a new Archbishop of Canterbury, Thomas Cranmer, both enthusiastic supporters of the Reformed Church, and the necessary legislation that would give birth to the Church of England. From 1536, Cromwell began the dissolution of England's monasteries. It was a campaign of systematic vindictiveness in which, in less than 4 years, changed the charges of laxity and corruption were used to justify the forced dismemberment of every single one of the country's monasteries. 560 were suppressed, yielding the crown more than £200,000. Over 50,000 monks and nuns were displaced. And in becoming head of the church and acquiring the enormous riches of the country's monastic foundations, Henry had theoretically greatly increased the power of the monarchy. The Pilgrimage of Grace. The execution of Anne Boleyn in 1536 sparked the most serious civil uprising since the Peasants' Revolt in 1381. The Pilgrimage of Grace. It was not the actual beheading of Anne that caused the protest, but the assumption that with her death Henry split with Rome, and now have no longer necessary and could be reversed. A vast crowd assembled above all in the Catholic strongholds of the north, demanding the restoration of the papal authority. Faced with one popular protest on this scale, Henry had no option but to give way. Once the immediate threat was over, however, he exacted a fearsome revenge, instructing the Duke of Norfolk that he should cause such dreadful execution to be done upon any good member of every town, village, and hamlet that offended, as they may be fearful in this spectacle to all other Herefords that would practice like any man. His decryption and cruelty was entirely in character. In practice, almost the opposite was the case. To give his claims against the monastery and legitimacy, Henry had been forced to corrupt Parliament. The long-term result was that it was Parliament's influence that they were strengthened rather than the king's. At the same time, Henry's permanent need for money obliged him to sell off most monasteries almost as soon as he acquired them, prompting the greatest change in the land ownership since the Norman conquest. Henry squandered the wealth of the church in a matter of years. Characteristically, Henry's invitation with Anne proved short-lived, not least as the only child she had produced was a girl, Elizabeth, in 1536. His queen was beheaded on charges of adultery as the sign of clemency. Henry agreed that she should be decapitated with a sword. Whilst Henry VIII had begun the building of warships, it was under Henry VII that had a large-scale expansion of the navy. Began since the largest such program since the time of Alfred the Great is the Henry. They built a ship called the Henry Grace Addio, the largest ship in the world. It weighed over 1,000 tons and had 72 guns. 2 weeks later, he married Jane Seymour, and Jane Seymour died, and he produced a boy called Edward. Henry died in 1547.